This is Jerry with Jerry's Retirement Wisdom. Today we're going over 8 steps to correctly load line onto your fishing reel. I've got a spin cast reel. I've also got a bait casting reel. We're going to put line on both of these, and the technique is just a bit different for each one. In last week's video, I showed you this hack where you can make an aid for loading line onto your reel, and I'm going to show you how that works. I'm also going to give you a hack for using a can cozy to cut one of these, and that's going to keep your line from becoming unwieldy when it comes off the spool. If you stick around to the end, I'll give you a tip on how to double the life of your fishing line, and who couldn't use that? Why don't you come along?
First, we attach the reels to the fishing pole.
First thing we need to do is mount our reel to our pole. On the pole there's 2 slots here. Spinning reels mount under the pole, so you put the back end of the post near the handle, and then you screw down this front end, and it's going to tighten onto your reel, and that's what keeps your reel on the pole. And when you do this, you want to make sure this is good and snug. So we've got that good and tight. For a bait cast reels mount on the top of our pole. So similarly, the rear of the base of your reel goes in this back slot, and then the front gets captured by this adjustable slot here in the front, and that's going to come down tight onto our reel base, and that's what's going to hold our reel into place. You make sure that's good and snug. So now I have both of my reels attached to my pole. I'm ready to choose my line and spool it up.
Next is a really fun hack using a can cozy.
Well, the first thing we're going to talk about is how to do this hack. This is a can cozy. Happens to be the one from the company I used to work for. And basically you can take a can cozy and you cut off the end, something like this, and then you measure up how wide your spool of line is. And it doesn't have to be entirely correct, but you want it at least as wide as your spool. And then you can cut this so that what you end up with you get one of these. And what that does is that's going to wrap around your spool of line, and now when you pull line off of this spool, that's going to retard it from spinning away from you and becoming really unruly. So that's an easy hack for controlling your fishing line coming off that spool.
Let's tie the line to the reel.
So the first step in loading your reel is tying the end of your line to the spool. So to give an example, I'll use this piece of paracord. You can take your line around the reel, and then out here we're going to tie a uni knot. Basically a uni knot is you make a loop, then you come inside here and wrap this inside around several times. Then you pull this tight. Basically you're creating another form of a slip knot, and then you'll pull that tight down onto your reel and you're ready to start wrapping line. So that's terminating your line here using a uni knot. So let's do that on one of our reels and get started here. We're putting 20-pound test braid on our spinning reel. So I've pulled off a bit of line here, and I'm going to pass it through the first eyelet on our fishing pole and then come back to my reel. And then I'm going to use that uni knot to tie on to the reel here. I'm going to make a loop. Then I'm going to make a second smaller loop, and that's going to be the loop that we use to tie our uni knot. Then we're going to take the tag end or the loose end, and we're going to go around here 5 times. Okay, we've got 5 wraps in our smaller knot. We're just going to pull that down tight. Now, make sure that your bail is open Put your loop around your reel spool. Pull that down good and tight. Now fortunately for us, this reel has a soft body down here that'll catch that. If your reel doesn't have a soft body and it wants to slip, one of the hacks you can use is just put a piece of electrical tape down in there to give it something to grab. But I've got that tied down there tight now. Reach down in here and nip this off. I picked up these pruning shears at the Dollar Tree for $1.25, and they're great for nipping braided line. But in order to tie your line onto the bait casting reel, you can't just make a loop and slide that on. There's no way to do that. So first we have to feed the line through the guide here in the front. Our line's going to need to go around the spool and back out the front so we can tie a knot. So what I do is I give it a little set here so it's got a curl, run that underneath the spool and bring it around here. And then the easiest way to grab it is to take your needle nose pliers and just reach down there and grab the end of your line. Pull it out. Now I've got my line through my guide, wrapped around the spool, and I just need to come up here and tie it off. So just like we did with the spinning reel, you make a second little loop, and that's going to be for your uni knot. You can go around everything, and I go about 5 times. That's 1, 5. Okay. Pull that knot down tight onto my line. Then you can pull the 2 ends here and cinch this down tight. There we've got it pulled down nice and tight. Take whatever method you like and nip that off. Okay.
Which way should we feed the line?
So for our spinning reel, the line is on the spool in a certain way. You want the line to go onto your reel in the same direction. If you look at your reel from the rear, you can see that your reel turns in a counterclockwise direction as well. So we want to remember when we load our spinning reel, we want the line to come off of our spool in a counterclockwise direction so that it goes on the reel in a counterclockwise direction, and that will keep it from having those kinks and knots that you can get if it goes on the wrong way. For our bait casting reel, it's a much easier proposition because your line's going to come off your spool over the top just like this, and then as you can see, the reel turns in this direction and it can go right back on the way it came. So a bait casting reel is much easier to load because the line's going to load in the same direction as it comes off the reel if you just hold it up vertically. So that's how we're going to load the bait caster.
Easy spooling hack.
In last week's video I showed you how I used a roller from the Dollar Tree, and I made this aid for loading line onto my fishing reels. You can go to the link in the description below to see the details on how I made this roller. But basically, I took the foam part of a paint roller and I cut it up, and you can put that on this handle. Then you can take your roll of fishing line and just load that here onto the handle. Use a piece of foam, flat washer, and a cotter pin. And that's going to fasten that line onto this handle. So when I'm ready to spool this line off, I've got a way to control it. The tension on the foam inside and the foam outside will keep this thing from spooling ahead once it gets to when you want to stop. The only thing we need to pay attention to is how the line comes off our spool. Braided line is not as bad about keeping it set or memory as much as monofilament or fluorocarbon line is. But I'm going to show you today how to correctly pull line off of the spool and onto your reel, and that way regardless of what kind of line you're using, you're doing it correctly and you'll keep from getting knots and twists in your line.
Time to below the line.
For a spinning reel, we're going to make sure our line comes off counterclockwise, and that'll go onto the reel correctly. So a little trick I have for doing this, I'm going to take this wooden clamp, I'm going to clamp that handle, so as I feed line, it's going to come up off of the reel and through the eyelet of my pole to fill my reel here. You can see that line is peeling off counterclockwise, and that's what we want. When you're loading your reel, you want this line to be snug. So you let it feed through your fingers and you keep tension on that. So as you fill your reel, it's loading up with nice tension on the line. You don't want it loose on there. Now we're going to load it until we get up within about a 1/16 of the top of our spool here. That should be where we want to stop. As you can see, we're between an 1/8 and a 1/16 inch of the top of our reel where the bevel starts. So that's where we want to stop. And hopefully that means we've got about 140 yards of 20-pound test line loaded onto our spinning reel. We need our line to go on towards us. And the same thing, we need to hold it so that it goes on snug. You want a little tension on it as you reel it on. And we're going to load this 30-pound test right up to within an 1/8 to a 1/16 of the top of our spool in our reel. Okay, we've got our spool filled up to within an 1/8 to a 1/16 inch of our capacity here. And we've got that part done.
Now for some adjustments.
We've got our spin cast reel loaded up and ready to go fishing, and I've got an adjustment or two here to tell you about. First off, in the front here is your drag adjustment. And you turn this knob in the front. What that does is determines how much give you have when a fish grabs your line, so that they can't hit it so hard that they break it. And that way it'll give a little bit as you reel the fish in. The other adjustment or recommendation I have for you is after you've cast, or whenever it is that you want to close the bail, instead of cranking the handle to close that bail, just use your hand and close it. That's a lot easier on your reel, and it'll save the life of your reel than using the handle over here to crank it closed. So you know how to adjust your drag, and you know how to open and close your bail. The only other thing that you can do with a spin cast reel is you can loosen this nut on the opposite side of your handle, and this actually comes loose, and you can switch sides of whatever size you want your handle to be on. So that's really nice about a spin cast reel, is it can be either handed. So there we are, loaded up and ready to fish with our spinning reel. We've got our bait caster loaded. There's only one more thing to talk about, and that's adjustments. This star-shaped wheel here is your drag adjustment, and that adjusts how much a fish can pull before your reel lets go. When you tighten your drag, the fish will pull on your line won't give. If you loosen your drag, it'll give as the fish pulls, and it may not possibly break your line. On the side here are your magnets. What the magnet does is it helps retard the spin of your spool inside your reel. So if you set the magnet up on high, like to 10 if you're a beginner, it keeps that spool from really being loose and taking off on you. Until you learn to thumb it down as you cast and that sort of thing, you really need that set higher. As you get to be a more experienced fisherman, you can reduce the amount of magnet you need, and that'll help loosen up this spool on the inside of your reel and give it more free action. And lastly, when you load your lure onto your pole, you need to come back here to this adjustment, and you first tighten it down. Then you hold your pole up at about a 45-degree angle, and you push your button to release. This adjustment here, you want to let it go until your spool just starts moving. And what that does is when the lure hits the water, your spool won't spin forward and take off on you and cause a big bird nest. So every time you change a lure, you need to remember to come back here and make an adjustment to this knob here. Like I said, tighten it down, push your release button, hold your pole at about a 45 degree and start loosening this knob here until your spool moves. Then when the lure hits the water, as you can see, it stops and it doesn't spin forward and cause that big bird nest. So those are 3 bait caster adjustments that you need to make.
Now let's double the line life.
I showed you the 8 steps to correctly load line onto your reel. And whether you're using a spinning reel like this or a bait casting reel like this one, I hope you picked up some tips on how to correctly load line to your reels. I told you at the outset I'd share a tip on how to double the life of your line. Well, most of these reels hold something like 150 yards of line, and I don't know many people that can cast that far. So really what you end up doing is you end up using over and over again the line that's on the exterior of the spool in your reel. And when it comes time to discard that line, let's not throw it away. Take your line off of this reel and spool it onto another reel. That way the used line goes to the interior of the other reel, and the fresh line that's never been used, and that's about half of what's on your reel, will it now be on the outside of the other reel, and you've got fresh line to use that otherwise would have been discarded, doubling the value of your line.
Jerry's retirement wisdom.
This has been Jerry with Jerry's Retirement Wisdom. I hope you picked up some tips today as we've gone over the 8 steps to loading line correctly onto your reel. If you like my videos, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. If you'd like to see some more of my videos, just click right there. We'll see you next time.